The interplanetary market was alive with noise, colors, and smells. But one smell was different, sharper, and far more unpleasant. It came from the far corner, where a thin alien girl sat on the cold metal floor, knees pulled to her chest, eyes staring at the ground. Her clothes were torn and stiff with dirt. Her hair was tangled into thick knots. Her skin was hidden under layers of grime so deep that even the faint light from the neon stalls could not reach it. People walking past wrinkled their noses and quickly turned away, some muttered insults under their breath. Calling her a disease carrier, a waste of space, no one knew her name. And no one cared to ask. In this market, survival was for the strong and the clean. And she was neither. Merchants waved their hands to chase her away if she came near their stalls. Children laughed and threw small stones at her. The smell was her curse, thick and sour, clinging to her like a second skin. Some said she had not bathed in years. Others claimed the stench came from her blood itself. She sat still, trying to make herself invisible. A small, cracked metal bowl lay in front of her. It had only a few dull coins inside. It's not enough to buy even a sip of clean water, every few minutes she would lean down and sip from a muddy puddle on the floor. Ignoring the strange look she got that day, a tall human man named Mark Wren was passing through the market. He was a trader, carrying a small pack over his shoulder. He had traveled to many alien worlds and seen many strange sights. But when he walked past her corner, he slowed down. The smell hit him first. Sharp and foul, his instinct told him to walk faster to get away from it. But then his eyes fell on her face, half hidden behind greasy strands of hair. She was shivering, even though the air was warm. Her lips were cracked, and her eyes were dull like a dying ember. Mark hesitated. He could keep walking like everyone else, pretend she wasn't there. But something inside him didn't let him move. He took a step closer, and the crowd around him reacted instantly. "Human, don't go near her," a merchant warned. "She's cursed." "Disease will follow you home," another called out. Mark ignored them. He crouched down, lowering himself to her level. "Hey," he said softly, "what's your name?" She didn't answer. Only after a long pause did she whisper, "Leary." The word was so quiet, he almost didn't hear it. "Leary," he repeated. "Are you hungry?" Her head moved slightly in a nod. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small piece of dried fruit. She stared at it, her hands trembling. Then, with hesitation, she took it and ate it in small bites. As if afraid it would vanish, a group of alien guards noticed him and walked over. "Move along, human," one said in a deep, unfriendly voice. "This one is contaminated. Worthless, she belongs in the trash pit." Mark's jaw tightened. Contaminated. "Has anyone even checked?" The guard laughed. "Why would we? She's nothing. Keep walking." The people nearby started whispering. Some were sure the human was about to leave. After all, who would risk their health for a filthy alien girl? But Mark stayed where he was, looking at Leary's thin frame. Her shoulders shook as if she was expecting him to leave like all the others. Instead, Mark stood up, facing the guards. "I'll take her," he said, loud enough for the crowd, too. Here, the market fell silent for a moment. Then came the gasps, the murmurs, the disbelief. Is he insane? Someone hissed, "Humans are strange," another muttered. Leary looked up in shock. Her wide eyes searched his face for a sign of cruelty, but found none. Mark simply held out his hand to her. "Come on," he said. She stared at his hand, her lips parting in confusion. No one had offered her kindness in years. No one had wanted to touch her. Around them, the crowd waited to see what would happen. The alien girl's thin, trembling fingers slowly reached toward his hand, and in that moment, everyone knew something in the market was about to change forever. Asterisk, the crowd's whispers grew louder as Mark stood there with his hands stretched out toward Leary. Some people smirked, expecting him to pull the hand back at the last second as a cruel joke. Others shook their heads, convinced this human was making a dangerous mistake. Leary's fingers hovered in the air just an inch away from his palm. Her eyes darted around, watching the guards, the merchants, the children who had once thrown stones at her. She could not understand why this man was still standing here. "You don't want me," she whispered, her voice rough from thirst. "I smell bad. I'm not clean." Mark didn't flinch. "I can fix that," he said, his tone calm but firm. The lead guard stepped forward, his voice sharp. "This isn't your problem, human. You touch her, and whatever filth she carries will be yours too." Mark turned his head slowly toward the guard, his eyes steady. "Maybe," he replied, "but I'm not leaving her here." A murmur rippled through the crowd. No one talked back to the guards, not unless they wanted trouble. Yet here was a human, standing his ground for a worthless alien. Girl Leary's breathing quickened. She could feel every stare on her skin. It was too much, too dangerous. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to disappear back into the shadows. But something about Mark's voice, steady, unshaken, held her. In place, he crouched again, meeting her gaze. "Leary," he said, "do you want to leave this place?" Her throat tightened. I can't," she muttered. "They won't let me." Mark's lips curved into the smallest hint of a smile. "Then they'll have to stop me." The guard's hand dropped to the handle of his stun baton. "Human." "Walk away," he warned. "Last chance." Mark straightened, his voice rising. "She's coming with me." The tension in the air was thick now. The market had fallen silent, except for the hum of neon lights and the distant hiss of cooking oil from a food stall. The guard stepped closer, towering over Mark. "You don't understand. She's marked. Someone out there wants her to disappear. That smell? It's the least of her problems." Mark didn't back down. "Then they'll have to go through me," he said. Leary's heart pounded in her chest. She had heard similar promises before, but they had always turned into lies. Yet here was this human who didn't even know her, defying armed guards for her sake. Mark reached into his pack and pulled out a small pouch. He tossed it to the guard. The jingle of credits was loud in the quiet market. "For her," Mark said, "consider this a fair trade." The guard caught the pouch and weighed it in his hand. His eyes narrowed. "You think you can just buy her?" Mark's tone was cold now. "I think I just did." The guard's gaze shifted between Mark and Leary. The crowd leaned in, waiting for a fight. Finally, the guard grunted. "Fine, take her, but if trouble follows, it's on your head." Mark didn't respond. He just extended his hand to Leary again. "Let's go." Her thin fingers finally touched his. Her skin was cold, and her grip was weak. But the contact sent a shock through her. Someone was holding her without pulling away, without gagging, without disgust in their eyes. As they started walking, the crowd parted like water. Some whispered curses. Others watched in silence. "You're insane," a merchant muttered as they passed. "Humans are always doing strange things." Another said, shaking his head. Leary kept her head down. She didn't want to see the faces of the people who had shunned her for so long, but she couldn't ignore the warmth in her hand. When they reached the outer edge of the market, she finally spoke. "Why are you doing this?" Mark glanced at her, because no one else would. She shook her head. "You don't know what I've done. You don't know who I am." "I know enough," he replied. "You're someone who deserves a chance." Her eyes filled with tears. She didn't want to shed. She had been given food before, scraps, out of pity. But no one had ever offered her freedom. They walked through a narrow alley toward the docking bay where Mark's ship was parked. The air smelled cleaner here, and, for the first time in years, Leary felt the faint taste of hope, still. Her voice trembled when she asked, "What if I am dangerous?" Mark's lips twitched in a half-smile. "Then I'll keep you where I can see you." As they stepped into the docking bay, the hum of ships filled the air. Mark's small cargo vessel stood at the far end, sleek but clearly worn from years of travel. Leary hesitated at the ramp. "If I step on your ship," she said slowly, "there's no going back." Mark looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Good," he said. "You don't belong back there anyway." She took a deep breath, and together they stepped inside. The ramp closed behind them with a heavy clang, sealing her fate in the shadows of the docking bay. A hooded figure watched them leave, his eyes glinting with interest. He pulled out a small communicator and spoke into it. "The human has her," he said quietly. "Prepare to intercept." The ramp of the market's main platform was busy. The air was thick with the scent of alien spices, burnt fuel, and the constant hum of cargo drones. Mark walked ahead, holding Leary's hand as if he had been doing it for years. She followed, with small, hesitant steps, her head still low. Every few moments she glanced over her shoulder. Her eyes scanned the crowd as though expecting someone to grab her at any second. Mark noticed but said nothing. He didn't want to scare her more. Yet deep down, he knew her fear was not without reason. They passed a group of merchants unloading crates. The workers paused to stare. Some made faces at the smell. One even muttered, "That's the market rat." But none dared step closer while Mark was beside her. His human frame was tall, his stride firm, and there was something in his eyes that told strangers not to interfere. Still, the uneasy silence around them felt wrong. Mark had been in enough shady ports to recognize when a crowd was watching too closely. Somewhere behind them, footsteps matched their pace. "Keep walking," Mark said quietly. Not turning his head, Leary's grip on his hand tightened. "Someone's following," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I know," Mark replied. His tone was calm, but inside, his mind was already racing. They turned down a narrow corridor between to docking bays. The walls were high, the air cooler here. Shadows stretched across the metal floor. Mark's boots echoed softly. But another set of steps followed at a slower, deliberate pace when they reached a junction. Mark stopped and turned suddenly. His eyes scanned the dim space. A tall figure in a hooded cloak froze for half a second before blending back into the crowd behind. Mark didn't chase. He simply noted the face, or what little he had seen of it, and continued on. Leary's breathing was fast, her shoulders stiff. "Is it someone you know?" he asked. Her answer was a quiet nod. "One of the hunters?" Mark's jaw clenched. "Then we move faster." They exited the narrow corridor and entered the larger docking area. The ceiling here stretched high above, lined with bright lights, and the sharp smell of engine coolant. Ships of all shapes and sizes rested in their berths. Loaders moved cargo containers, and the hum of engines filled the air. Mark's ship was parked in a far corner, smaller than most of the freighters here. Its black hand-silver hull bore scratches from old asteroid runs, but it was fast and reliably exactly what he needed now. Halfway across the docking floor, a group of alien dockhands stepped into their path. They wore matching uniforms and carried long metal poles used for guiding heavy cargo. The leader, a broad-shouldered alien with green-tinted skin, looked at Mark and then at Leary. "You can't bring her in here," he said, blocking the way. Mark's eyes narrowed. "Why not?" "She's marked," the dockhand replied. "Orders from above marked ones, don't leave this station." Leary froze, her hand trembling in his. Mark's voice dropped lower. "And what happens if I try anyway?" The dockhand smirked. "You won't make it far." Mark stepped forward, just enough for the alien to feel the tension in the air. "Move," he said. His tone carried no anger, just a quiet certainty, the kind that made the other dockhands shift uncomfortably. After a long pause, the leader raised his hands. "Fine, not my fight," he muttered. stepping aside. They continued walking, but Leary's heart was pounding so loudly she could hear. It in her ears, they're everywhere, she whispered. The hunters, the watchers. They don't give up. Mark glanced at her. Then they'll have to learn how to fail. They finally reached the ship's ramp. The small security panel blinked red until Mark keyed in a long sequence. The ramp hissed open, revealing the dimly lit interior. The smell inside was different, clean, faintly metallic, and comforting compared to the market stench outside. Leary hesitated at the base of the ramp. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "Taking me will bring you trouble." Mark gave a half smile. "I've had trouble before." They stepped inside, and the ramp closed behind them with a deep metallic thud. The noise echoed through the small cargo hold, sealing them. Away from the noise of the station, Mark set down his pack. "First thing," he said, "we get you cleaned up." Leary's eyes widened. She stepped back. "No," she said quickly. "I can't. It's just water," Mark said gently. "Hot water, soap, nothing that will hurt you." She shook her head. "Last time someone tried to wash me, they weren't trying to help." Her voice broke, and she turned away. Mark stayed where he was, his voice steady. "I'm not them, Leary. I won't hurt you." The sound of the engines from nearby ships rumbled faintly through the hull. The tension between them hung heavy. Mark knew this moment mattered if she didn't trust him now. She never would. Slowly, he moved toward the med bay, pressing the panel to slide the door open. Inside, bright lights illuminated a small space with clean tiles, a compact shower unit, and a bench along the wall. He stepped inside, turning on the water so she could see the steam rise. "Look," he said, holding out his hands under the spray, letting the warm water run over his skin. Safe. Leary stood in the doorway. Her eyes locked on the falling water. Her fingers twitched at her sides. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to feel clean again, but fear kept her rooted. Mark didn't rush her. He stayed under the spray for a moment, then stepped back. "Your choice," he said. "But if you let me help, we can start over." Her gaze moved from the water to his face, searching for any sign of trickery. She found none. Slowly, she took one shaky step forward. Far away, in the shadowed corners of the docking bay, the hooded hunter spoke into his communicator again. "She's on the ship," he said. "We'll take her before they leave orbit." Asterisk, the medbay door slid shut behind them, sealing out the faint rumble of the ship's engines. The warm steam from the shower unit wrapped around the small space, carrying a faint scent of clean soap. Leary stood just inside the doorway, frozen. Her eyes locked on the falling water as though it were some dangerous weapon. Mark stayed a few steps away, giving her space. He understood fear. He had seen it in soldiers before battles, in refugees after bombings, in children who had lost everything. But the fear in Leary's eyes was older, deeper. The kind that comes from being hurt too many times. "It's just water," he said softly, running his own hands under the spray, letting it soak his skin. Warm, safe. Her shoulders trembled. "Last time they said it was safe too," she whispered, "but it burned. It smelled like metal." They laughed while it happened. Mark's jaw tightened. He could picture it, someone using harsh chemicals on her, not to clean her, but to humiliate or harm her. "This isn't like that," he said. "This is to help you, nothing else." She shook her head slightly, her eyes darting to the walls, looking for exits. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you doing this for me?" Mark hesitated, then said, "Because you deserve it," for a long moment. Only the sound of the water filled the room. Then, slowly, Leary stepped closer. Her bare feet touched the warm tile floor. She stopped just short of the spray. Mark moved to the control panel and adjusted the temperature. "Feel it," he said, holding out his wet hand. She stared at it, then reached out. Her fingertips brushed his palm. The heat's surprised hurt was gentle, not burning. She pulled her hand back quickly, almost embarrassed. See? Mark said, no harm. She stood there, biting her lip. Then, with a small nod, she stepped into the stream of water. The first touch of warmth made her flinch, but when nothing bad happened, she stayed. The water began to run brown at first, streaks of dirt and grime swirling around her feet. Mark picked up a cloth and soap. Handing them to her, she hesitated, looking at the items like they were foreign objects. You do it, she said quietly. I don't remember how. Mark nodded. He worked slowly, starting with her hands. The grime softened under the warm water, revealing pale skin underneath. He moved to her arms, careful not to touch her too suddenly. Her breathing slowed as the dirt washed away. When he reached her face, he spoke gently. Close your eyes, she did, and he wiped away layers of filth, strand by strand revealing the color of her skin, soft lavender tone that caught the light. Her hair took the longest, the knots were tight, matted with dust and sweat. He worked through them patiently, using warm water and gentle fingers. She leaned slightly into his touch, almost without realizing it. Then something unexpected happened. As the last of the dirt came off her neck and shoulders, faint glowing lines began to appear along her skin. Thin, delicate patterns like streams of light ran down her collarbone and across her arms. Mark froze. Leary, your skin is glowing. Her eyes snapped open, panic flashing across her face. She stepped back, pressing herself against the wall. No, you can't see that. Why? Mark asked, keeping his voice calm. What does it mean? She shook her head, her voice breaking. It means I'm not just a street rat. It means they'll never stop looking for me. Mark's mind raced. The markings weren't just decorative, they looked like the kind of genetic identifiers used in certain royal bloodlines across alien worlds. Whoever Leary was, she was important enough for someone to want her erased. You think this changes my decision? Mark asked. It doesn't. Her breathing was fast again. It should. If you're smart, you'll leave me. It's safer. Mark took a step closer. Not for you. For a moment, she just stared at him, the water running down her glowing skin. Her lips trembled. No one has ever seen me like this, and stayed. Well, Mark said with a faint smile, I'm not no one. He finished rinsing the last of the soap from her hair. The water was clear now. The stench that had followed her everywhere was gone, replaced by the clean scent of warm skin and simple soap. When they stepped out of the shower, Mark handed her a towel. She wrapped it tightly around herself, as though afraid the dirt might return if she let go. He led her to a small storage locker and pulled out clean clothes, loose, soft fabric that wouldn't irritate her skin. She dressed quietly, her mind still processing what had just happened when she emerged. The change was startling. The frightened, filthy figure from the market was gone. In her place stood a girl with luminous skin and eyes that seemed far brighter now. Mark looked at her for a moment, then said, You're safe here, but outside the med bay. The ship's sensors pinged softly a proximity alert. Mark's eyes flicked toward the panel. The hunters hadn't given up, and now they were close. He met Leary's gaze, his tone firm. We need to leave this station now. The ship's engines hummed softly as Mark guided it away from the docking bay. The neon lights of the station faded into the distance, replaced by the dark stretch of open space. But the proximity alert still blinked on the console, a quiet reminder that someone was following. Leary sat in the co-pilot seat, wrapped in the clean clothes Mark had given her. She kept glancing at the scanner display, her hands tightening in her lap each time a blip appeared on the screen. They won't stop, she said quietly. Not until they have me. Mark kept his eyes on the controls. Then we make sure they don't. For a moment, she said nothing. The silence between them was heavy. Then she took a deep breath. You need to know the truth. It's only fair. Mark glanced at her. Go on. She looked down at her hands, tracing the faint glowing lines that now ran across her skin. I wasn't born in the streets, she began. I was born in the royal compound of the House of Valera. My mother was a servant. My father was someone important. Mark frowned. Important? Leary's voice trembled. He was the crown regent. Mark leaned back slightly. The House of Valera was a name even humans had heard. Known across several systems for their wealth and power. You're telling me your I was never meant to be known, she interrupted. I was what they call an unacknowledged heir. The regent couldn't admit I was his daughter, but he still kept me close. In secret, she paused. Her gaze distant, as if she were seeing another time. When the regent fell ill, there was a power struggle. I was just a girl. But they feared I might be used as a political tool. And then? The prince died, Mark's eyes narrowed, and they blamed you. Her head lowered. They said I poisoned him. There was no trial, no proof, just whispers in the halls. One night, the guards came for me. I ran. I didn't stop running. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the seat. The smell. It became my shield. I stopped bathing, stopped caring. I thought if I was disgusting enough, no one would want to touch me. No one could take me back to them. Mark was silent for a long moment. He understood now why the hunters were so relentless. She wasn't just a runaway, she was a living threat to someone's throne. You could have stayed hidden, he said slowly. Why stay in the open market? Her lips curved into a sad smile. Because even in hiding, I didn't want to die alone, I thought. Maybe one day, someone would see me. Mark's jaw tightened, and they did. Her eyes met his. Yes, but you need to understand helping. Me is dangerous. They'll use every resource to find me. They'll come after you too. Mark shrugged slightly. Then they'll have to try harder. Before she could answer. The proximity alert beeped louder. Mark checked the scanner, 3 small ships trailing behind them. Closing the distance slowly. They're here, he said, his voice steady. Looks like they didn't waste time. Leary's breath caught. If they catch us, they won't, Mark interrupted. Flipping switches on the control panel. But we need to get somewhere they can't follow easily, he steered. The ship toward a nearby asteroid field. The scanners flickered as chunks of rock drifted past. The hunters followed but kept their distance. They know the field is dangerous. Mark said, that gives us time. Leary's hands tightened on the armrests. You're risking your ship for me, Mark glanced at her. I've risked more for less important things. The rocks outside grew larger as they entered the field. Shadows played across the cockpit. The scanner's pings became irregular as interference grew. Tell me something, Mark said, eyes fixed on the path ahead. If you could go back, if you could prove you didn't poison the prince, would you want your old life? Leary hesitated. I don't know. I don't want power. I just want a place where I'm not hunted. Mark nodded. Then we'll find that place. For a moment, the silence was almost peaceful. But then a faint thud echoed through the hull. Leary's head snapped toward the sound. What was that? Mark's expression darkened. Boarding clamp, before she could react. The lights flickered. A red warning flashed across the console. Unauthorized docking detected. They've latched on, Mark said, pushing out of his seat. Stay. Here, lock the cockpit. She grabbed his arm. Mark, don't get hurt because of me. He gave her a reassuring look. I'll be fine, just remember you're not going back to them. As he left the cockpit, Leary sat frozen, her heart pounding through the window. She caught a glimpse of a dark ship clinging to theirs. Its surface marked with a crest she knew all too well, the Black Serpent of House Valera. Her past had found her, and this time it had come with claws. The ship's metal floor vibrated under Mark's boots as he moved toward the cargo hold. The red glow of the emergency lights painted the walls in warning. Each step brought him closer to the sound of scraping metal the hunters were forcing their way inside. At the far end of the hold, a circular airlock door rattled violently. The magnetic clamps were already half cut. Sparks flew as a torch sliced through the final locks. Mark grabbed a pulse rifle from the weapons rack. His movements sharp and practiced, he crouched behind a stack of supply crates, eyes fixed on the airlock. He didn't have long before the breach was complete. The metal gave way with a sharp hiss. The inner door slid open, and 3 figures stepped inside, all wearing dark combat suits with the black serpent emblem of House Valera on their shoulders. The leader removed his helmet, revealing sharp features and pale silver eyes that locked onto Mark instantly. "Step aside, human," he said, in a calm but cold voice. "We're only here for the girl." Mark raised the rifle slightly. "Then you're in the wrong place." The man smirked. "You don't understand what she is. She's dangerous. Her bloodline is poison to the galaxy." Mark's voice was steady. "What I understand is she's a person, not your property." One of the hunters moved toward the cockpit door. Mark's finger tightened on the trigger. "Step away from that door," he warned. The hunter froze but didn't move back. The leader chuckled. "Do you really think you can protect her?" "We're trained. We've hunted far worse than a runaway." Mark shifted his stance. "Then you haven't hunted me." Before they could respond, Mark fired. The pulse shot exploded against the wall, forcing the hunters to dive for cover. The cargo hold filled with the sound of energy fire as Mark moved between crates, keeping them from advancing. In the cockpit, Leary could hear the muffled shots. Her hands shook as she stared at the locked door. She wanted to stay hidden, but the thought of Mark facing them alone made her stomach twist. Her eyes landed on the small maintenance hatch under the console. Without thinking, she crawled inside, moving quietly through the narrow service tunnel toward the cargo hold. Back in the hold, Mark ducked behind a crate as a pulse shot scorched the air above him. He glanced toward the airlock. One of the hunters was trying to flank him. He fired again, forcing them to retreat. "You can't win," the leader called out. "We've got your ship marked. Even if you escape now, we'll track you to the edge of the galaxy." Mark's jaw tightened. "Then I'll make sure you don't leave this ship." Suddenly, a soft thud came from the ceiling above the hunters. They looked up just in time to see a maintenance hatch slide open, landing behind them with a small stun baton in her hands. She swung it hard, hitting the nearest hunter in the back. The electric charge made him seize up before collapsing. The other turned toward her, but Mark took the opening and fired, dropping him instantly. The leader spun, grabbing Leary by the arm. His grip was iron-strong. "You shouldn't have come out, princess," he hissed. Pulling a blade from his belt, Mark surged forward, ramming into the leader and knocking him back. The blade clattered to the floor. Leary stumbled away. Mark's rifle came up again, aimed squarely at the hunter's chest. The man stared at him, breathing hard. "You think killing me will stop them? We are many. She will never be free." Mark's voice was ice. "Maybe not. But she'll be free from you." He fired, and the leader fell, the black serpent emblem scorched and burning for a long moment. The only sound was the hum of the ship's systems. Mark lowered the rifle and looked at Leary. She was breathing hard, her eyes wide. "You could have stayed hidden," he said. She shook her head. "I couldn't let you fight alone." He gave a small smile. "Then I guess we make a good team." They dragged the unconscious hunter to the airlock and ejected him into space, along with the bodies. The dark ship still clung to theirs, but without its crew, it drifted uselessly away. Mark returned to the cockpit, Leary following close behind. He dropped into the pilot's seat and began punching in coordinates. "We need to leave the sector before more of them show up." Leary sat beside him, her hands still trembling. "Where will we go?" "Somewhere they won't think to look," Mark said, pulling the ship into hyperspace. The stars stretched into long white lines as they jumped away. But even as the view shifted to the safety of deep space, Mark knew the fight wasn't over. The hunters had been bold enough to board his ship next time. They'd bring more. Leary sat in silence, staring out at the endless stars. For the first time in years, the smell that had kept everyone away from her was gone, but now she carried something else, hope mixed with fear. She turned to Mark, her voice quiet but firm. "No matter where we go, they'll keep coming." Mark met her gaze. "Then we'll keep running until they can't." The stars outside the cockpit slowly shifted back to stillness as the ship dropped out of hyperspace. Ahead of them was a quiet green and blue world. Tucked far from any major trade route, it had no large cities, no spaceports, and no reason for the hunters to search here. Mark leaned back in the pilot seat. "Scanning the readings, looks like a small human colony," he said. "Population's low. They keep to themselves." Leary sat beside him, her gaze fixed on the planet, the light from its sun reflected in her eyes, soft and warm. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He glanced at her. "Beautiful is nice, but safe is better." As the ship descended through the clouds, they passed over rolling hills and forests thick with green. Small clusters of houses sat near winding rivers. Smoke curled from chimneys, and children ran through open fields. It was the kind of place where life moved slowly. Mark guided the ship to a landing site near the edge of the settlement. When the engines powered down, there was only the sound of wind brushing against the hull. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Leary stared at the open ramp, her fingers gripping the armrest. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I've been running for so long." Mark stood and offered her his hand. "Then we learned together." She took it, and they walked down the ramp. The air outside was fresh, carrying the scent of wildflowers and wood smoke. A few colonists stopped to watch them. Curiosity in their eyes, Mark led her toward the nearest cluster of houses. An older woman with sun-browned skin stepped forward, her smile warm, new arrivals. She asked, "Just passing through for now," Mark replied. "But we need a place to stay. And maybe work." The woman's eyes moved to Leary. She didn't flinch at the sight of the faint glowing patterns still visible on her skin. Instead, she nodded kindly. "We have room. You're welcome here." Leary's throat tightened. She wasn't used to kindness from strangers, not without suspicion hiding behind it. The woman guided them to a small wooden home on the edge of the fields. Inside, it was simple but warm handmade furniture, the faint scent of baked bread. A small bed sat in the corner, covered in a quilt. "You can stay as long as you need," the woman said. "This place doesn't ask questions." When she left, Leary sat on the bed, running her hands over the soft quilt. "I don't remember the last time I had a bed like this," she whispered. Mark leaned against the doorframe. Arms crossed. "You do now." That night, they ate with the other settlers. In a large hall lit by oil lamps, no one asked where they had come from or why. They simply shared food and stories. Leary found herself smiling, almost forgetting the weight of her past. After the meal, she and Mark stepped outside. The night sky was clear, the stars scattered like silver dust. Leary looked up, her voice quiet. "It feels strange, not being hunted." Mark's gaze followed hers. "Enjoy it while it lasts," he said, but there was a softness in his tone. Days passed. Leary began helping in the fields and learning simple tasks from the settlers. The smell that had once kept everyone away was long gone, replaced by the faint scent of fresh air and clean water. One afternoon, as she carried a basket of vegetables back to the house, she saw Mark repairing a fence. He looked up at her and smiled, a real, unguarded smile. She realized then that he wasn't just her rescuer. He had become her anchor that night, sitting by the small fire in their home. Leary spoke. "You could leave, you know. You've done more than anyone ever has for me." Mark shook his head. "And go where?" "I like it here." She looked into the firelight, her voice soft. "Then maybe." "I've found my home." He glanced at her. "You sure?" She nodded. "Home isn't a place, Mark. It's the person who doesn't let go." They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them for the first time in years. Leary felt the weight in her chest lighten. The fear was still there, but it no longer ruled her every thought. But safety was never absolute. Far beyond the quiet fields of the colony, in the cold darkness of space, a sleek black ship drifted silently inside. A figure in a high-backed chair watched a holographic projection of Leary standing beside Mark. The image flickered, but was clear enough. The figure's voice was calm, almost amused. "So, she thinks she's safe." Another voice answered from the shadows. "Shall we move in?" "Not yet." The figure replied, "Let her believe she's free. Then we'll take everything." Back on the quiet planet, Leary didn't know that the storm hadn't ended, had only moved further away. Waiting for now, she leaned against the doorframe of their little home, watching Mark work in the fading light, and for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to feel something she never thought she would, again: hope.